Good morning. I'm Matt Haller, IFA's President and CEO, and welcome to the 2022 IFA Franchising Economic Outlook. Today, we will discuss the jobs, economic growth, and establishment growth forecast prepared by Fran Data, along with two guests of our member companies, Randy Cross, President of Fish Window Cleaning, and Jesse Kaiser, a multi-brand franchisee in the St. Louis and Michigan markets. Across every sector, franchises were a significant engine powering the 2021 economic recovery. While the latest figures on inflation are worrisomely high, let's look on the bright side. As the pandemic wanes, the economic recovery is clearly on full blast. Policymakers that kept people working in 2020 should avoid punitive measures that restrict business growth and undermine 2021 business, employment, and wage gains. We'll talk about much of those challenges that our members are facing across the country here when we get into our discussion. But again, franchising is leading the economic recovery, and I want to start today's panel with our good friend, Daryl Johnson, CEO of Fran Data, to talk about some of the numbers, and then we'll bring in our guests. Daryl, let me throw it over to you.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to talk about the economic forecast that we just completed. I'll start by saying that Fran Data's research goes back decades, and it covers many economic cycles. If you have just one takeaway today, it's that the franchise business model is the leading source of growth and jobs coming out of an economic downturn. The model itself is designed not only to create opportunities for prospective franchisees who voluntarily or were forced out of jobs during downturns, but it's also opportunistic in finding sectors where there's greater potential. Recoveries change some of the retail and business landscape. Franchising is able to move quickly to find where that potential is greatest. And you'll see in the numbers that I'm about to talk to you about how that is borne out. Since the start of the pandemic, for instance, we have seen over 400 new franchise brands come to market. Now that's it from the very bottom of the downturn. And they're coming to market in sectors where demand is perceived to be greater coming out of the downturn. In other words, franchising looks for opportunity and takes advantage of it when there are changes that occur in the economy. In 2021, franchise establishments grew nationally by 2.8% to 775,000 business establishments. 2.8% is a pretty big number. Historically, franchising has grown 1.5%, sometimes 2%, but anything over 2% is fairly significant. We see in our forecast for 2022, our models are saying that we're expected to see that trajectory continue, albeit at a somewhat slower pace because of the labor and supply chain challenges that the panel will discuss in a bit. With such robust growth, franchising is projected to grow about 2.2% in 2022 and reaching almost 800,000 franchised establishments in the U.S. Employment is forecast to grow 5.2% to a total of 8.5 million jobs, representing a full recovery to pre-pandemic levels. As you know, employment nationally has yet to get close to the recovery level of the pre-pandemic era. Franchising will push through that over the course of this year. And that's a net gain of almost 260,000 jobs compared to 2021. And to put that in context, a good monthly forecast for the entire country's creation of new jobs is at about that level. So franchising is a major contributor coming out of downturns, and the numbers that we're looking at in 2021 and forecast for 2022 bear that out. Output. Franchise businesses in nominal terms are forecast to have improved by 4.9%, almost $827 billion in 2022. And as a contribution to GDP, it's over $500 billion and representing about 3% of the entire country's GDP. Sector-wise, across industries, the leading sectors that are showing franchise expansion opportunities are in personal services. They're also in residential services, not surprising with so many people having been relegated to their home and home offices for much of the past 2 years. A lot of franchising services are flowing to those sectors, reinforcing the strength of the model in being able to move to where opportunities are greatest. Across the country, if we look at the balance of where growth is occurring and forecast to grow, that 5.2% of growth in 2022 is largely going to show up in a band of states across the Southwest and into the Southeast, and somewhat in the Midwest. While it's somewhat balanced across the country, the leading states that are showing growth from a percentage standpoint are Texas, Florida, Arizona, South Carolina, Tennessee, North Carolina, Nebraska, states that have fairly supportive and encouraging business environments. We're forecasting growth of employment of 5.2%, as I said, and that will put us past the pre-pandemic totals of 2019. So overall, as I mentioned at the beginning, the message coming out of this is that the business model of franchising is one of expansion, of growth. It's opportunistic both in terms of people and in terms of businesses, and it's reflected in these numbers. Matt?
Thanks, Daryl. Great overview, and really appreciate the partnership with FranData to help describe what's happening in the franchise economy. So I want to bring things to our panel here. I want to start with Randy Cross, President of Fish Window Cleaning. Daryl, you mentioned that the commercial and residential services sector is the second highest rate of growth. Randy, you run one of the leading commercial and residential services franchises. Talk a little about the company and what you're seeing to bring some contextualization to that. You also operate a location yourself. So from a franchisee perspective, some of what you're seeing, challenges and opportunities, both from a system-wide and then sort of at the ground level.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. The opportunities obviously there. Daryl talked about all the businesses. We're blessed because pretty much every business has a window, and we would want to clean that window. So we're at a great time in our history, for sure. The challenges are definitely the labor piece of things. Matt, Fish is experiencing incredible growth right now, and we don't want to sound greedy by any means, but we could be doing much more if we could just have a handful more employees. Finding, retaining, and getting these folks to just get out and apply for work has been a challenge. As a franchisor, we've added recruiting services on our franchisor level staff to help our franchisees do that. We'd love to add even more services to help them retain those folks. I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point, but we're always a little bit nervous about that joint employer piece, which prevents us from providing even more support to our franchisees. But overall, our outlook is strong, and it would be even stronger if we could find just a handful more of window cleaners.
And where are you seeing new franchisees coming from? I mean, Daryl touched on, franchising tends to sort of overperform the recovery. We've seen that in previous downturns. Obviously savings rates are, very high. People have cash. Credit is still very available. It's different than the last downturn. And we're in this great resignation, kind of era. Are you seeing some of that with interest in your system?
Absolutely. We're seeing a mix, actually.
Yeah.
It's about 50-50. 50% forced out to do something and looking for a business opportunity, and the other 50% just tired of corporate America and want to go out and fend for themselves, so to speak, and become a business owner.
Great. I want to bring Jesse into the conversation here. You've got two different brands that you're involved with. Obviously, OxyFresh representing here today, but also in the Sport Clips system. Yeah. So, both the personal services sector, which is the number one category driving growth on the salon side. Curious what you're seeing there, and then maybe on the ground level with the OxyFresh system.
Yeah. With the salons, we're seeing, I think, what will be the golden era for about 50% of the industry. Obviously, with salons, you've got to have employees to cut hair, right? So the owners that have figured out how to attract and retain the best stylists in the market are getting the lion's share of business, and the others are struggling, to be honest with you. So that what that's really making now, where 4 or 5 years ago I could hire as many stylists as I wanted, and I needed to go find the customers. Now I have as many customers as I can handle. I need to find more stylists to be able to take up with that demand. It's a unique situation.
What about the states that you operate in? I mean, what are you seeing as far as disparity? Daryl touched on that in obviously our national overview, as well as some of the state-by-state forecasts, but you're in a number of different states.
Yeah, I'm in 5 Midwestern states, and to be honest with you, I don't see much difference in the ability to recruit or to get customers. I will tell you that the more dense the area, a little tougher it is for competition to get new employees. I like the rural and tertiary markets a little bit better. But overall, I'm seeing an uptick in people wanting to come to work, and I'm seeing an uptick in customers wanting haircuts.
All right, I want to go back to Daryl for our next question. IFA just completed a survey around labor issues. All of our panelists this morning have touched on this, but it's clear that the labor challenges are holding back the full potential of the sector's growth. So even while franchising is driving the economic recovery, labor remains a challenge to get to fulfill the full demand that is there for products or services in the franchise business model across all sectors. Daryl, what do you see as franchising's role in this, and what do you see as some of the solutions here? And then we'll bring it back to Jesse and Randy as well to talk about this.
Labor issues across the country are really divided into a couple topics. The one that franchising has the greatest ability to influence is the movement of what is largely characterized as unskilled labor into skilled labor. Franchising is a business model. If you look at how the model trains new franchisees, trains employees, which are the responsibility of the local business, but the system for training them, the resources for giving them guidance and training is provided as part of the brand responsibilities. And if you look at franchising in that context, it's the largest technical training school in the United States. It literally trains millions of people. And this training is not about just the service that's being provided by the franchise to the public. It's also about business skills. It's about interpersonal skills. It's about team skills. It's the type of characteristics, the foundation skills that make any person who is inexperienced and largely without significant technical skills an appealing employee, an attractive candidate for employment. And franchising does that in a very substantial way. So its contribution to the labor efforts of this country largely are driven by its ability to train and prepare employees for upward mobility.
So it's not about just wages, right? It's about the employee experience. It's about culture. Jesse, how are you seeing that play out in your locations? I mean, what are you doing? How have things changed sort of coming out of the pandemic for you?
Coming out of the pandemic, we decided that we were going to focus on protecting who we brought in on the team a lot more than we had prior to that. And I think that's really changed the culture in our companies, where it feels like a family now, right? And it's hard to leave your family. And I think the other thing that I feel like is a great advantage for me as a franchisee is I've been able to open up a lot of locations because the systems are easy to follow and run. And what that's really done is that's created some upward opportunities in my organization. So I have managers, I have area managers, and very soon I'm going to be hiring someone that's going to manage the entire brand of each one of our brands that we do, right? As I add on to other brands. So that upward mobility, I feel, is where the great resignation is happening. They want to see an opportunity where they are and doing what they love, but they want to be able to do something more than what they're doing. Even if they're not ready for it, they don't have the capabilities for it, they want that opportunity and can see where that is. So I think that's kind of unique in franchising in general, but also something I'm just happy to take advantage of in my company.
Thanks, Jesse. We've seen in our research, Randy, franchisee employee salaries, 63% of our brands have increased salaries just in the last 6 months. You touched on the training and some of the work that Fish is doing to give your franchisees more support. Can you just further unpack that a little bit for us? Really on the lines of, the role of the franchisor to help support and ensure your franchisees have all the tools that they need to be successful to run these businesses.
Yeah, as Daryl said, franchising, it's a great thing. They take great mid-level managers and teach them how to be business owners. And I started as a franchisee first. Fish taught me everything I needed to know to be a business owner. The employment manuals and workman's comp insurance and all those things, all those boxes you have to check before you can open the door as a business owner. So Fish is trying to double down on all of those services to provide even more help in coaching and guidance. During the height of the pandemic, we were communicating with our franchisees daily with things like the PPP program and giving them the tools to survive the pandemic. And as they're coming out of the pandemic, providing them reopening manuals, how to get going again, how to re-engage with their customers who may have been shut down during the pandemic. And of course, keeping up with the economic trends. What's it take to get a window cleaner to walk in the door as far as training wages and commission programs to encourage them and to retain them and increasing the benefit levels. The list goes on and on and on, Matt. We're in the process of upgrading our technology tools to help them as well. So absolutely anything we can do to help our franchisees go out and find business, get the business clean, collect the money for it, and keep our customers happy.
Well, we've heard a lot about the quality of labor, right, and what's actually available out there. You seeing that in the location you operate or across the system?
Yes.
Is it what it needs to be? Is it just we need more labor, or is it really the quality of who's available?
Yeah, in our offering, typical window cleaners are figuring things out. Most of our employees are 18 to 25 years old. We're giving them a jump start into whatever they're moving on to next. Many of the folks are going on to college or doing other things or taking trade level jobs. So for us, it's more about the quantity. We need more applicants, and we need more folks that are willing to come out and pick up a mop and squeegee and get it done.
Daryl, I want to bring it back to you and talk about the role of government here. Obviously, government played a major role in a very positive way for franchising at the outset of the pandemic, with the PPP and the Employee Retention Tax Credit and other SBA programs. Putting a lot of money, not just to keep employees retained, but also changing some of those programs to ensure that businesses could actually put those resources into operating expenses. Because as we like to say, if you don't have a business to come back to, then the employee piece is not going to matter. So that was something that was very important. Obviously, as those employer-focused programs wane, a lot more money has gone to keep people. With the child tax credit, unemployment insurance supplements. It's put a lot of money into the economy, but some have argued that there's been a disincentive to come back to work. Then you have the lockout issues, which has been kind of a patchwork approach across the country. And now we get into this new era where at the federal level, there are new issues that are being discussed that would be even more challenging, particularly for franchising. Randy mentioned issues around joint employment. Daryl, I just wanted to get your perspective on kind of the role of government, the appropriate level of government involvement, from a pandemic perspective, and then some of the concerns that the report discusses that may be looming on the horizon for the franchise model.
Matt, you've identified some of the looming issues that are out there. The government's role in as it relates to the franchise business model is not different than it as it relates to business in generally. It's there to encourage and foster growth. We're in a capitalistic society. That's the foundation of what our economy is built on. Money will find its way to the best applications and use. To the extent that the government tries to interfere with that, it disrupts the flow of capital. Government's role in the last 2 years during the pandemic was huge, both at the business level and at the family level. And in both cases, government's role was to support and carry people and companies through the pandemic so that there was a business and a household on the other side of it. And they have done that. The challenge that we're now confronting is, do you want to encourage and foster job growth? You want to encourage and foster business creation? Because on some level, those start to work against the constraints that might otherwise be imposed by government. A minimum wage has been in place both at the federal level, in many states at a higher level, for many decades. It's a safety net concept. But to the extent that the minimum wage gets above and distorts, say, a rural community's ability to support a local business, then you are going to disrupt business creation. And the challenge for government is to find where that balance is. Universal approaches in times of crisis are necessary. Universal approaches or solutions in times in periods where you want to encourage growth become very problematic. And it's those structural impediments that now seem to be creeping in at many levels that are going to create a problem, not just for the franchise business model, but for business in general. This isn't a business versus employee issue. This is creating an environment where business and employee growth can take place. And the franchise business model has proven its ability to do that many times over, and we just heard our two colleagues on this panel describe that. The challenge with the government role now is to be clear on what their purpose is and what they're trying to achieve.
Thanks, Daryl. Yeah, I think it's clear that government overreach is really the only thing that has the potential to hold franchising back from its full potential. And as you stated well, government has a role to play in the franchise business model, both directly with the Federal Trade Commission and rules there that help franchisors and franchisees understand their obligations. But other areas of government, particularly around labor model challenges, impose these blunt instruments on franchising that make it more difficult for franchisors and franchisees to deliver the value that franchising really creates at all legs of the stool, from brands to consumers, for franchisees and for their employees. Jesse, just at on a ground level, your perspective on the role of government kind of over the last 2 years and the evolution from things that might have been helpful to you and now where things may be going that are, maybe keeping you a little bit more up at night, perhaps.
Just regulation in general. I'm very fortunate. I've got a wonderful wife that now has stepped in and helping out with all the HR in our company. And she's like, you have to have that turned in by this day. I'm like, I've never heard of that form. I've been in business for 17 years. She's like, well, your company's big enough now, you have to do it. I'm like, oh. So those kind of things. I mean, honestly, if she wasn't on top of that, I wouldn't be doing it. And it's not something that is a franchisor or not franchisee thing. It's just the company has grown with the number of employees to the point where I've got all these other requirements that no one taps you on the shoulder and say, hey, you're big enough now, you have to do these things. Those are some of the things that, some of it's necessary. I'm okay with it. But how they communicate that you're supposed to know it, I think the government could do a better job letting people know what milestones are requirements for you at that certain size of a company and so forth. So I think that's something they could do much better. And if they want to take away some of that stuff, I don't see the need for some of the reporting that we're doing. I just don't see it. But
yeah, and Randy, you touched on this earlier on the joint employer front. Our view is that's destructive to franchising if joint employment takes hold. Fish window cleaning is effectively responsible for all of your franchisees' labor and employment matters. That's not good for the brand, and that's not good for existing or future franchisees. Talk about how that issue would be a problem for Fish or just for franchising in general, and what it really has the power to do as a force for good.
Yeah, well, tagging on to Jesse's story, I mean, I'd like to, as a franchisor, provide that level of service. I'd like to go in there and tell them when he needs to do those type of forms and things. But the government's preventing me from doing that out of fear, out of that joint employer issue. They want to attach us as franchisee and franchisor, and they want to make us as the franchisor responsible for all the decisions of the local franchisee, and we just can't do that. It would add too much cost to the equation and take away some of the freedoms and flexibilities that Jesse and I have as franchisees in our systems as well. So yeah, we just like to have the government stay away from our ability to support and provide extra tools for our franchisees. It's to our benefit when our franchisees go out and clean a lot of glass. We all make money together through the royalty models that way. But unfortunately, the government's gotten our way of being able to do that efficiently.
Yeah, unfortunately, at the Washington level, in Congress, a lot of the proposals that would take some of these blunt instruments I described earlier, like joint employment, are not going to advance legislatively. But we do have some concern from an IFA perspective about the Labor Department and the National Labor Relations Board and the Federal Trade Commission, which have all been working, hand in glove, interagency to share information and strategy about how they're going to expand some of these tools that we haven't seen over the last 4 or 5 years, and now with a change in the political environment in Washington are sort of coming back potentially with more vigor. Daryl, you touched on some of the state level issues. California is no stranger to being a breeding ground for really aggressive regulations or anti-business legislation. We're now seeing one of the biggest threats to the franchise business model through a bill called the FAST Act in California. That has not become law yet, and our hope is that it never will be. But California was also one of the states that was most restrictive in terms of the pandemic and lockdowns, mask requirements, and things like that that the governor has just recently lifted. Daryl, any perspective on California and its where it sits with respect to other states in our state-by-state outlook?
Matt, franchising is a local business model. And the challenge with a state like California or the federal government in trying to mandate a universal solution to what they perceive to be a problem, whether it be around labor or around, if it's in the food industry, cleanliness, around business practices, whenever a global solution is trying to be imposed, it makes it very hard for the local business to adapt, because it often doesn't apply in the way that a global rulemaking body thinks it should. There are differences in every locale. And the challenge in California is it has been a series of legislative initiatives at the state level that has tried to adjust the rules around which local businesses behave. And when it comes to franchising, they have been thrown or captured in a perceived net of large corporate businesses. And the consequence of that is that local franchise business is suffering from a series of rulemakings, of legislation that makes it harder for them to actually conduct business in a practical way, whether it's making labor decisions at the local level based on what local conditions require, whether it's training. One of the survey feedback that we got recently in a survey we had done is the single biggest challenge facing franchises on the labor side is the quality of labor. Well, if you look at it, that's the flip side of saying franchising trains unskilled to be skilled. But if you don't have a quality of candidate coming in that meets minimum tests, you've got a problem. If California would focus on the quality of the employees, they would do far more in helping businesses with hiring than trying to impose constraints on how the business functions and behaves.
Thanks, Daryl. I think one of the things we're seeing universally is just all of our members with the desire to grow are figuring out ways to do more with less, and that's partly responsive to, in some of these states, the heavy hand of government, the cost of doing business, but also just a reaction to the quality of labor that's out there. Guys, I want to thank each of you guys for being here today. I think a really good, insightful panel. Again, franchising continues to drive the economic recovery across all sectors, all 8 that FranData measures for us. The biggest headwind is the quality of labor, as well as the potential threat of the heavy-handed government coming in and sending us off course. So Randy, thank you for all you do for IFA and for your franchisees in the fish system. Jesse, thank you. Continued success and growth for you and your system. And Daryl, thanks to you and the FranData team for your work to put this report together for the IFA. And thanks for our viewers for tuning in with us today.